Hey patrons, welcome to our Q&A video for August 2019. First, I want to say welcome to all of our new patrons. We got a bunch of new patrons this month, most likely checking out this new series Doomfall, which we just started, which even just so far at this start is proven to be pretty interesting and pretty cool and intricate, kind of collecting the input from the Dungeon Diver patrons, and then also letting you guys vote on little things, and then taking those elements and kind of trying to build a story out of them is even just so far been pretty neat for me, and I'm really excited about next month's pages and just seeing where this thing goes. So that's been cool. We got a bunch of questions this month, so I'm gonna go ahead and just get right into those. But before I do, again, I just wanted to say thank you all so very. Usually I do this at the end, but just in case you guys don't last till the end of the video, I want to say thank you guys so much for being my patrons, supporting the comic. At this point, I've said this before, with the shifting, advertising landscape and a variety of other things, you guys are my support system here and what lets me continue doing this, doing all the stuff I do for you guys as patrons, but also continue doing the stuff that I put up on the website. So I really appreciate it. All right, so first up this month, we have a question from Kasra. It's a good question. So Kasra says, with the comic/superhero genre going like all dark and gritty and real, have you ever considered or been tempted to take your work down that path, even if it was just like for a special storyline or that sort of thing? So I really haven't. Look, I like the whole dark, gritty, realistic thing. I like that to a degree. Like I like watching shows that do that. I like when the movies explore like that whole, but that's not what I want to do. Like I like it. It's not what I set out to do with Analog and D-Pad. What I set out to do with Analog and D-Pad as far as superheroes was to kind of dial back from that dark, gritty, super realistic kind of superhero thing that we see so much of these days. I kind of wanted to do superheroes a little bit more like I remember them from when I was a kid, where it was like, it was just fun and like, I do want some realism in there, but I wanted realism in a different way. Like the things that interested me about doing Ethan and Lucas as superheroes was, what does that look like in reality? And not like the heavy burden of responsibility that like weighs them down, but like how does that mess with like their social lives? How does it like, and like what's the reality of like, because in the comics we always see like superhero goes out patrolling at night, automatically runs into supervillains, but what's the flip side of that? The reality of it, like probably night after night of like not seeing any crime, because I mean it's not like, unless you live in like crime city or something, I mean I have to imagine like muggings aren't all that common, or that you're in the right place at the right time. So that's the kind of realness that I wanted to kind of explore with that. But I mostly wanted it to be like a pair of guys who were superheroes, and they're kind of like fanboys they're excited about being superheroes in a way. And so there's going to be some reality. There's going to be downsides to being a superhero, the way that it, the danger it puts you in, the way that it messes with your social life, that sort of stuff that the guys definitely have to kind of grapple with. But, my outlook in general is sort of like Ethan wears a cape, even though a cape is not a practical superhero accessory. And like, we know that now, but all the superheroes I grew up with wore capes, and it was like a cool thing. And so that's, so Ethan wears a cape because he thinks it's, it's cool and it's classic, and it's, even though it's probably more trouble than it's worth. And that's that kind of sums up my view of this, is like, it's got to be fun. You got to do it for fun, and it's got to be like a good time. And I'm not looking to be telling a story that's like depressing overall. I want it to be kind of lighthearted, funny, fun, and having a good time. Okay, James asks, of all your different projects, which one is your favorite, and which is the most difficult or challenging? So my favorite, honestly, my favorite series will fluctuate back and forth between the Starcaster Chronicles and Analog and D-Pad, depending on what's going on at the moment in those series. I like them both for different reasons. Sometimes I like one more than another, just depending on what's happening that's most exciting in each of those series. But as far as what's the most difficult and challenging, it would actually probably be the console wars, and that's difficult and challenging for a couple of reasons. It's partially difficult because I can really only write about that series when something is happening, not even with video games, but it has to be like about the consoles themselves, about changes to the consoles, and that doesn't happen a lot. Like, shifts in that landscape happen. The companies make iterations on the individual things, they add new features to the consoles, whatever. But it's not as abundant as other areas that I could be talking about, and which kind of dovetails into the other part of it that's challenging, which is the way I design these consoles, where they're soldiers that are like basically built, they look like the consoles, is that there isn't a great variety of appearance. I mean, they don't tend to have hair. Like, I've done facial hair, but apart from like facial hair scars, eye patches, and the clothing that I added, which I added specifically so I could maybe start like even adding another layer of differentiation between them. It's very difficult to create like a set of characters that are consoles, that you could follow on a character level. Like, say, if I wanted to create a squad of PS4s and tell a story with them, because they all look the same, or they all look so very similar, it's more difficult to create individual characters out of them. So that's also always a just a challenge when drawing that series, because by their very nature they are legion. They are all Xboxes look the same, all PS4s pretty much look the same. So by design they should be all very similar, but from a storytelling standpoint that works against me, because it's harder to create individual characters that you can recognize at a glance. And James, I'm not answering your second question. I'm not going on record, on video, answering that question. David wants to know, were you really kicked in the face in your sleep by your kid? David, I have been kicked just about everywhere in my sleep by my children. I've not had a black eye. I did have once. I did have a big bruise right about here. I've had bruises like on my shoulder, on my side. Like my 3-year-old tends to kind of roll over and like whip his head around, so I've been like cracked in the side of the head by him, and so yeah, especially when we have both of them. I mean, we have a king size bed, but even with both the kids in the bed, and they tend to sleep sideways or upside down, so there's a lot of flying limbs, and I have definitely walked away with some bruises. Okay, Michael came out this month with a question which was, as I thought about it, it was really difficult to narrow down. So Michael asked, which actor is your favorite in the role of Batman? And that's really hard when I think about it, just because I like most of them for one reason or another. Like, I mean, we can cross out Clooney and Kilmer right off the bat, obviously, but that still leaves Michael Keaton, who I saw that movie back in the 90s when it came out with my dad, and so like there's a nostalgia element to that. I think that Christian Bale's Batman trilogy is such a fantastic trilogy. I think the last one's a little weak, but the first two are so great. It's less that I think he's the best Batman, but his movies were so good that it creates just this whole aura of just greatness around that particular Batman. And then it's kind of the opposite with Ben Affleck, where his movies were garbage, but I kind of feel like, and we didn't get a lot of him. I don't think we got enough of him. I think it would have been nice to see a solo movie with him as Batman. I liked what I saw of him as Bruce Wayne and as Batman, but like I said, like the movies he was in were so terrible that it's like really hard to extricate that from the facts. So I think like he's a great Batman, but he was brought down a little bit by the movies he's in, and I think Bale was a good Batman who was very elevated by the Nolan movies that he was in. So I guess if I was going to use a tiebreaker, perhaps to say like which is the Batman whose movies I would prefer to watch more than the other, I would say Christian Bale. Just because I would watch his movies over and over, whereas I really have very little desire to ever see Justice League again. All right, Daniel's got a question that's kind of not really a question. It's sort of a question, but it's not a question. So he says that I guess the German Olympic Sports Confederation declared esports not a real sport because there's no physical aspect to it. And then he asks, like, I guess it feels like hypothetically, but he asks me, like, how much do you sweat if you play the darts or you shoot arrows? I suck at darts. So I don't sweat. Personally, I don't sweat at all. I did take archery as a kid. I don't remember sweating a great deal. But I think the difference is, like, with, and with darts and like archery, that, there's not a lot of exertion, but there is still an element of physical control, and physical movement to those sports. Whereas, and look, I'm not advocating one way or another, because you can certainly argue that, playing video games has a physical aspect in that you need some good hand-eye coordination. But I think it's less of a matter of, with darts, there's a whole upper body thing and aim, and you're throwing the darts. Archery, definitely, there's actually a big physical component to archery. It's not simply just like point and shoot. But I guess the argument they would be making is that video games is mostly a mental exercise in terms of, a fighting game, remembering combos, knowing how to execute those combos, knowing when to execute those combos. Fortnite muscle memory, knowing when to build, what to build, what path you want to take, where you want to go, stuff like that. So, I mean, look, I'm not going to advocate, I'm not going to be the one that declares esports not a real sport. But I mean, I guess, to answer your question and perhaps why they kind of felt that way about it is that there is more physical motion to darts and archery than there is to video games. And there is going to be more variation from person to person in terms of, skill with archery and skill with darts than there would be, from person to person in, video games, unless we're like actually mapping like finger speed, like how fast your thumbs can move between buttons and that sort of thing, which is certainly an element to it. But I think that, certainly with video games, most of it is here and most of it is here. And that's evidenced by the fact that people from all walks of life can be incredibly competitive and successful in video games, whether you're, underweight, overweight, short, tall, disabled, whatever. The tools for video games are localized as long as you have a brain and, some general use of your hands. I mean, again, it's been proven you don't even need complete use of your hands to be successful in competitive video games. I know a buddy of mine is actually great at video games, and he only has the use of one hand. So again, I'm not going to make that distinction, whether or not video games should be allowed in the Olympics or whatnot. I'm just kind of theorizing why this council might have decided that way, I guess. Okay, Steven cheated because he asked like 400 questions at once, but they're relatively simple questions, so I'm just going to try and get through them. All right, so here are Steven's questions and Steven's answers. When are we getting the office tour? Well, at some point, I imagine I'm going to look around my office and I'm going to feel like it's clean enough to show it off. That has not been the case yet. First, I moved into it and it was a wreck, and then I filled it up with stuff and it looks like a pigsty, and so usually I have just stuff scattered all over the place. So one of these days I will clean it and I will feel good about showing it to the public, and then I will give you the office tour. What's going on with Starcaster? We are actually past the halfway point for issue number 7. I just put up through page 15 on the on our Starcaster Patreon, so we're trucking along with this new issue. We'll have issue 7 done before the end of the year, and we'll get started on issue 8. So it's going good. Any thoughts on a Stadia haunting when it comes out? I do have plans in the console wars for when the Stadia does release. I just I'm waiting. I need to see this thing in practice. I need some concrete evidence. I need to know whether it works, if it doesn't work, because all of that's going to inform how I portray it in the comic strip. Have you prepared your family for September 6th? I assume you mean the release of Monster Hunter Iceborne. I'm not sure what I'm doing there yet. I played Monster Hunter World on the PS4, so all of my progress is on the PS4. So I could start on the 6th. However, all of my other friends that I would like to play with, they played on the PC, so they played months after I did and whatever. And the PC version of Iceborne doesn't come out until January sometime. So I basically have not decided if I'm just going to dive in, next week with my PS4 save and just play with randoms and enjoy the game and then move on. Or if instead I'm going to take this fall to start over at some point on the PC version of World, build up my character to the point where come January, then I can play with them when Iceborne launches. So I just haven't quite decided, when I'll have the time, like if I have the time to play Iceborne now, or if it'd be better to just kind of like casually mosey through playing World over the next few, and whether or not I want to start all over again just for the sake of playing with friends. So I haven't come to a decision about September 6th yet. I still have 5 days left to decide. Any thoughts on the game, Paladin, and the mixers for stuff it's doing? Or in Mixer in general, I thought Paladins failed. Didn't that game fold? I generally recall that it was a kind of an Overwatch-ish knockoff, and I thought it closed shop. Maybe not. As far as my thoughts on Mixer, I know Ninja went there recently, but I don't care about Fortnite and I don't care about Ninja, so I have no thoughts one way or another on Mixer. Never used it. This is a good question, part of Steven's barrage of questions, and one of the reasons I want to answer this one is the comic ever going to shift focus a little bit to Lucas or Scott? It's been very Ethan-oriented, and while the comic has always been very Ethan-oriented, it would be nice to see, those other guys. And absolutely, I do have some plans for shifting, shifting over to do some very Lucas-oriented storylines, and same with Scott. I've kind of just revealed a little bit of backstory to Scott a little bit, and we'll see more of that. And so it is definitely, my plan to, and I've written some stuff for, like a Lila-focused thing and Ethan, or like a Lucas-focused thing. I want to get into Lucas's relationships a little bit more and what's going on there and how he feels about that whole thing. So, it is definitely my plan to, because once I started the kind of exploring the relationship aspect of this, it felt natural to kind of start with Ethan and dive into there, and then sort of kind of segue into, what's going on with Lucas and Scott as well, as far as that dynamic goes. And then finally from Steven, do you think Amazon's The Boys will affect your stories? No, I don't think so. I mean, I read the comics, quite a while ago. I loved the show. I thought the show was fantastic. But no, I don't think it's going to affect my stories at all. I love what The Boys does, but that's not really my direction for the superhero stuff. Okay, next up, Jesse asks, have you been able to play much of / are you enjoying Fire Emblem Three Houses? I enjoyed Fire Emblem Three Houses quite a bit. I actually just recently finished up my Blue Lions playthrough, so that was fun. Played on Hard Classic, didn't lose a single person, so I'm very proud of that. Worked very hard to make sure nobody died. I rewound when I needed to, etc. I am considering at some point maybe doing a New Game Plus playthrough again to do one of the other houses. I just need a little breather. That was a very kind of long game. I think 70 something hours of turn-based combat. So I'm going to play some other stuff for a little while, and then maybe I'll dive back in for another playthrough and maybe do the Golden Deer playthrough. And finally this month, Zachary asks, what is your response to the new Picard trailer? Are you a fan? I guess I'm a fan of Star Trek. Growing up, I mean, I like Star Trek. I was always much more of a Star Wars fan. So I don't, just because I really like Star Wars doesn't mean I dislike Star Trek. I always, I would watch the Next Generation. I used to watch the original series with my parents. So I've seen a lot of Star Trek, but whereas I've seen pretty much everything Star Wars, I have not seen every episode of Star Trek. I've not seen every series, every movie, etc. But I enjoy watching it. So the Picard trailer for me, it's kind of that looks cool, but I'm not fanboying out about it just because I'm not as invested in Star Trek. I'm fanboying out a little bit about The Mandalorian because I love that stuff, but I'll probably watch Picard. I think it looks neat, but I'll end up watching it as a casual fan rather than somebody that's picking up all sorts of references and throwbacks and that sort of stuff. All right, and that is it for questions. Thank you guys for asking them. Thank you guys for being here, being my patrons, hanging out, participating in the work and supporting the work. And we will see you right back here in September. Thanks.